Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election in the state of Washington, and today I'll just be briefly going over a poll that came out yesterday morning in Washington that showed Donald Trump leading Joe Biden by 1%. He was at 46%, and Biden was just below him at 45%. And so I'm not going to be looking too deeply into the crosstabs of this poll or doing any specific math, but I'm going to use this poll to kind of paint a broader picture about polls in general for 2024 and explain why 2024 might be a repeat of 2020 in the sense that nearly every poll is skewed and overestimating a certain candidate. In 2020, that candidate was Joe Biden. In 2020, not only was Biden ahead in the swing states, he was winning Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina comfortably. He was also tied or ahead in Texas, Ohio, and Iowa. And there were polls that came out from time to time in deep red states like Arkansas, Montana, Utah, from what I can remember, Indiana, Missouri, that showed him within, 5 or 6 points, that showed a race that was consistently a Democratic landslide. Because again, if Biden's winning Wisconsin by 8 and he's winning, or he's within 2 points of winning Texas and he's winning Ohio, maybe he's within 7 in Montana. Maybe he's within 5 in Missouri. And so those polls were all consistent. They all painted a very good picture for Joe Biden. Now, what happened? Biden won the election, and he did okay in the Electoral College, but he didn't come close to winning Ohio or Texas. He was blown out in the red states like Utah, Montana, and Missouri. And he won Wisconsin and Michigan and Arizona, but by pretty slim margins. And so Donald Trump, I think the polls look very similar for him right now. He's ahead almost universally in the swing states. The only ones were, he's been back and forth in Wisconsin specifically, but he's doing really well in Arizona and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia right now. And he's also doing well in blue states. We've seen polls, even in states like California, where he's doing 5 to 8 points better than he did in 2020. And today in Washington, we see he's apparently up by 1%. Now, I don't think anyone actually thinks Trump's going to win Washington. Trump lost the state by, I think, nearly 20 points in 2020, and the joke is that they polled the state but took out Seattle, and even then, Washington would have voted for Biden comfortably, even if not a single vote from the city of Seattle was counted, so even that wouldn't be able to account for the difference there. But again, this poll to me obviously isn't a reflection of what we should be expecting for the general election. I'm going to keep Washington in the safe category for Joe Biden. I don't want to see, or I really don't think I'm going to see anyone moving it down from that just because of one poll. But the fact that we're seeing a poll showing Trump winning Washington says everything you need to know about the state of the polls right now, right? Like, you can look at this one of two ways. Either you can say, okay, the polls are consistent because they show a Trump victory nationwide that's pretty strong, and he might not win Washington, but if he's within the margin of error, he's doing really well nationwide. If he's only losing Washington by 3%, he's going to win nationwide by a lot. And in that way, the polls are consistent. Or you can look at it, you can kind of reverse engineer it. You can say, well, I don't think Trump's going to win Washington. I don't think he's going to come close to winning Washington. Therefore, I don't really believe the polls. And I'm not really in Camp A or Camp B, but I'm a heck of a lot closer to Camp B than I am to Camp A. Because, again, the polls haven't proved anything to me. In 2020, they overestimated Joe Biden, sure. But polling misses often are reversed the next year. In 2022, no one talks about this because the polls were okay broadly, but the polls underestimated Democrats by a good amount in most of the competitive Senate and gubernatorial races. And in 2020, they may have overestimated Joe Biden, and in 2016, they may have overestimated Hillary Clinton. But in 2012, the polls, were okay, but they did give Mitt Romney a bit more credit than he was actually deserving of. So it will vary between elections, and this is a trend in international politics. Like in 2017 in the United Kingdom, this is a pretty famous example. In the United Kingdom in 2017, the polls underestimated labor by a lot. Then in 2019, they overestimated labor. And that is because often in America or the UK, the public gets mad at the polls for being wrong. So the polls overcorrect and they create false samples. And that's what they're doing right now. The only way we can get a sample in Washington that votes for Trump is one that is a lot whiter than the state as a whole, a lot more rural than the state as a whole, and just in terms of registration, a lot more Republican than the state as a whole. That's the only way you can get an electorate that votes for Trump in Washington. And polls are doing this because they don't want to be wrong in the same way they were in 2020 and 2016 again. And they're overcorrecting. They did this in 2022. It's why we had samples in like Georgia, for example, that were significantly whiter than the state as a whole, and that's why the polls had Walker winning, or a lot of polls had Walker winning, even though he did not win. And so, at the end of the day, that's how things going on. I think there's some overcorrection. I think that the polls are going to miss in general, and right now, the polls that show Trump sweeping the swing states and being competitive in blue states are the exact opposite of what we saw in 2020. All you have to do is just flip Trump and put in the name Biden. So, I just want to talk a little bit today about the polls. I'm going to do a longer video, either tomorrow or on Monday, but I really want to start to talk because it's May now. We have 6 months to go to the election, and the polls are going to matter more and more. As more voters tune in, the polls are going to be worth more and more value intellectually. But right now, the numbers they're giving are nonsensical, and that is the sentiment that I really feel. I genuinely don't think that I trust the polls right now. When you get results like this, it makes sense. So, again, polls should always pass the smell test. It's why in 2020 on election day, I didn't have Biden winning Florida or being, within 2% of winning Ohio. That's why I didn't think Missouri was competitive. And now I'm playing the opposite. This year, I don't think Trump's going to, win Minnesota or New Hampshire. I don't think that he's going to come within even 5 points of winning Washington, even 10 points of winning Washington, really. And I don't really have a lot of, I don't really have a lot of trust in the polls right now. So let me know what you want to see next. And again, if you have any ideas, feel free to comment. Again, as always, I appreciate your time. And if you enjoyed this video, if you agree with my perspective, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next upload.